Okay, so you want to really crush your next business meeting, right?
Yeah,
No more feeling tongue-tied or like you're just blending into the background.
we've all been there.
We've all been there. And that's why this deep dive is going to be like your secret weapon.
Oh, I like that.
We found this awesome Business English podcast episode, and it's all about meeting mastery. Think of it like a cheat sheet for those like really crucial conversations.
What I think is so fascinating about this particular episode is it goes beyond just generic tips. It actually gives you very specific phrases that you can use in different meeting scenarios.
Okay,
And it gets into the psychology of why they work.
that's cool. So it's not just about sounding professional. It's about strategically using language to achieve goals. It's like having a verbal toolkit for meeting domination.
Exactly.
I love it.
Just like any toolkit, though, you need to know which tool to use for the right job, right?
Right.
And that's where understanding the nuances of these phrases comes in.
Okay, let's unpack this toolkit then. The podcast breaks down these phrases by category.
Okay.
So we've got opening a meeting, giving your opinions, asking for clarification,
Yes.
agreeing, disagreeing, and then wrapping things up.
Right.
Where do we even begin? What jumps out at you as like the most crucial starting point for our listeners?
Well, I think first impressions matter, right?
They do.
So nailing that opening really sets the tone for the entire meeting. The podcast suggests a classic, "Thank you all for being here today."
Okay, I can see how that's polite and all, but wouldn't something like, all right, let's get down to business, be more efficient.
Sure.
We're all busy people, right?
Yeah, efficiency is definitely key, but think about the impact of starting with gratitude.
Okay.
That simple thank you acknowledges everyone's time, and it sets a collaborative and appreciative tone right off the bat. It disarms people and makes them more receptive to what you have to say. You're not just barking orders.
Right.
You're inviting them into a conversation.
I hadn't thought about it that way. It's almost like you're building rapport before you dive into the agenda. I like that. So maybe instead of just a basic thank you, we could say something like, thanks for making the time, everyone. Let's make this meeting count.
Exactly. You've taken a simple phrase and you've elevated it to create a more engaging and purposeful opening.
Perfect. Okay, so we've opened strong, set a positive tone. Now it's time to like share our brilliant ideas.
Absolutely.
What's the magic phrase for that?
The podcast recommends a simple but effective opener, in my opinion.
Hold on. I use in my opinion all the time.
Right.
That feels pretty basic.
It might seem basic,
Is that really all there is to it?
but there's a subtle power at play here. Think about it. When you say, in my opinion, you're not just tossing out an idea, you're framing it as your considered viewpoint.
Oh,
It subtly positions you as someone who's thought things through. You're not just reacting off the cuff.
right.
And in a business context, that adds weight to your words.
I see what you're saying. It's like you're claiming your expertise without being arrogant. So instead of blending in, you're like, hey, pay attention. I've got something valuable to contribute here.
Precisely. Now, of course, you don't want to overuse it
Right.
and sound like a broken record.
Okay.
The podcast suggests some smart variations, like from my perspective, or my take on this is
I like that.
subtle shifts in language, but they keep things interesting while still achieving that same goal of establishing your viewpoint.
Okay, let's put this into action. Imagine we're in a brainstorming session for a new marketing campaign.
All right.
I'm going to throw out a wildly ambitious idea,
Okay.
and you be the skeptical colleague.
Bring it on. I'm ready to be persuaded.
Okay, so from my perspective, I think we should be focusing our entire budget on a campaign that involves launching our product into space.
Okay.
You'll generate tons of buzz and media attention. What do you think?
Launching into space. Huh. That's certainly a bold idea.
You see,
Well, I appreciate the ambition behind it.
you're already engaged. I bet you're already picturing our product orbiting the Earth. But what happens when we need to disagree with someone's idea without causing a meeting meltdown?
Right.
How do we navigate those choppy waters?
Yeah, that's where things can get tricky. You don't want to be a yes man, but you also don't want to shut down every idea with a blunt no. The podcast suggests using a phrase like, that's a good point, but I see it differently because...
Okay, I like the that's a good point part. It's like you're acknowledging their contribution before introducing your alternative perspective. But doesn't that make it sound a bit formulaic?
A key is authenticity. It's not about reciting these phrases like a robot.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying strategy, which is to find common ground before respectfully presenting your differing viewpoint. That approach tends to be much more persuasive than just flatly disagreeing.
It's like you're saying, hey, I hear you, I respect your idea, but let's explore another angle.
Exactly. And by offering a clear, because after your disagreement, you're not just dismissing their idea, you're providing a rationale, which makes your position stronger.
All right, let's play this out. You be the one with the interesting idea this time, something completely out there.
Okay, how about this? I think we should replace all our office chairs with yoga balls. It'll improve posture and encourage a more dynamic work environment. What do you think?
That's an interesting idea, and I can see how it might promote a more active workplace. But I see it differently because I think it could create accessibility issues for some employees. Plus, I imagine there would be a lot of unintentional rolling around during important meetings.
Okay, you gracefully dodged the yoga ball proposal. You acknowledged my point, respectfully disagreed, and even injected a little humor into the situation. Well done.
See, it's all about finding that balance between honesty and diplomacy.
Exactly. And those power phrases act like a verbal safety net,
Okay.
helping you navigate those potentially awkward moments with grace and confidence.
Okay, so we've covered how to open strong and express our opinions effectively. But what about those times when we need to get clarification without sounding like we weren't paying attention? Any secret phrases for that?
Those moments of confusion are inevitable in meetings, right?
Yeah.
Someone throws out a jargon-filled sentence, or you're just not quite catching their drift. The key is to seek clarification without sounding lost or like you're accusing them of not being clear.
Right, because no one wants to look like they weren't paying attention.
Exactly. The podcast highlights a simple phrase for this. Could you clarify what you mean by?
Okay, that's straightforward, but doesn't it sound a bit accusatory? Like you're putting the blame on them for not explaining things properly?
It's all about the tone. Remember, you're not challenging them, you're genuinely seeking understanding. You could even soften it further with something like, I'm not sure I'm following completely. Could you elaborate on that?
I like that it shifts the focus to your own understanding rather than implying they're doing something wrong. It's like you're saying, hey, I want to make sure I'm fully grasping your brilliance.
Precisely. It shows you're actively engaged and invested in the conversation. Let's say someone in a meeting throws out a term like synergistic paradigm shift. I mean, what does that even mean?
Oh, I've been in those meetings. Everyone's nodding along like they understand, and you're just sitting there thinking, am I the only one who's lost here? So that situation, I could say something like, could you unpack that term for me? I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Perfect. You've acknowledged the term, subtly highlighted that it might not be clear to everyone, and reinforced the goal of shared understanding. Now, what happens when someone throws out an idea you actually love? How do we express agreement without just being a repetitive echo chamber?
Good point. I'm all for enthusiastic agreement, but you don't want to sound like you're just mindlessly parroting everything someone says.
The podcast suggests a simple but effective phrase I completely agree with.
See, that just sounds so flat, like a thumbs up emoji. Is there a way to express agreement with a bit more pizzazz?
You can absolutely add flavor to your agreement. Instead of just stating it, build upon the idea. Say, I completely agree with that, and I think it opens up an opportunity to. Then add your own insights or connect it to a broader strategy. It shows you're not just passively agreeing, you're actively engaging with the idea and taking it further.
Okay, I like that. It takes you from passive listener to active contributor, even when you're agreeing. But what about those times when you only agree with part of what someone's saying? How do we navigate that tricky terrain?
That's where those strategic disagreement phrases come back into play. You can say something like, I agree with specific point, but I also think we need to consider alternative perspective.
Okay, so you're finding that common ground, acknowledging the valid aspects of their idea, but then pivoting to introduce your own viewpoint. It's a subtle art, but it feels way more natural than just a blanket I disagree.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about winning the argument. It's about collaboratively exploring different ideas and arriving at the best solution for the team. So we've covered opening the meeting, expressing opinions, seeking clarification, and even mastering the art of agreement and disagreement. What else should our listeners be equipped with to truly conquer that meeting room?
Well, in addition to the phrases themselves, I feel like there's got to be a deeper layer of strategy at play here. It's not just about the words we use, it's about how we use them. Right?
You're absolutely right. The podcast doesn't just stop at phrases. It delves into some crucial strategies that go beyond just the words themselves. These strategies can make the difference between simply attending a meeting and truly leading the conversation.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Let's dive into those strategies. What are some of the key insights that jumped out at you?
One of the most fundamental and often overlooked tips is preparation.
Hold on, that seems pretty basic. Of course you should prepare for a meeting. Don't just show up and wing it. What's the deeper insight here?
It's more than just skimming the agenda and jotting down a few notes. It's about anticipating the flow of the conversation, the key players involved, and potential challenges that might arise. Think about it like a chess game. You wouldn't just move your pieces randomly, would you? You'd think several steps ahead, considering your opponent's potential moves and planning your strategy accordingly.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So it's like pre-playing the meeting in your head, anticipating potential objections or questions, and preparing your responses in advance. It takes away the element of surprise and allows you to steer the conversation in a more deliberate direction.
Exactly. And remember those power phrases we discussed? Having them at the ready, combined with your pre-planned responses, will boost your confidence and allow you to navigate those twists and turns with finesse.
It's like you're saying, don't just react, anticipate, be one step ahead. Okay, preparation check. What other strategic gems does this podcast offer up?
Another key takeaway is the power of conciseness. It sounds simple, but in the heat of a meeting, it's easy to get carried away and ramble on, losing your audience along the way.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. Sometimes I get so excited about an idea that I just want to keep talking and talking, adding more and more detail. But I can see how that might not be the most effective approach.
Enthusiasm is fantastic, but in a meeting setting, you need to balance it with respect for everyone's time. Being concise means getting your point across clearly and directly without unnecessary fluff. Think of it like crafting a tweet. You only have a limited number of characters to make an impact.
So it's about quality over quantity. Every word should have a purpose driving the conversation forward.
Exactly. And you know what? Those power phrases we discussed can actually help you be more concise. Instead of launching into a 10-minute explanation, you could say something like, in my opinion, the key takeaway here is, and then deliver your point in a succinct and impactful way.
Uh-huh. So the phrases act like guideposts, helping you stay focused and deliver your message efficiently. They're like little verbal shortcuts to meeting mastery. Okay, I'm loving these strategies. Preparation conciseness. It's like we're building a meeting mastery fortress brick by brick. What other essential elements should we add to our foundation?
Active listening, it's more than just physically being in the room and hearing the words. It's about truly engaging with what others are saying, processing the information, and responding thoughtfully.
Okay, but isn't everyone listening in a meeting? I mean, they're not exactly scrolling through their phones with their headphones on, are they?
You'd be surprised. It's easy to zone out, get distracted by our own thoughts, or just passively listen without truly absorbing the information. Active listening requires a conscious effort to be present, paying attention to both the verbal and nonverbal cues, asking clarifying questions, and showing genuine interest in what others have to say.
So it's like being fully present in the conversation, even though it's a group setting. It's like you're having a series of mini one-on-one conversations throughout the meeting.
Exactly, and it's not just about being polite, it's about gathering information, understanding different perspectives, and building stronger connections with your colleagues. And guess what? Those power phrases can actually help you become a more active listener.
Really, I thought they were mostly about speaking effectively.
They can be used both ways. Instead of just nodding silently, you can use phrases to demonstrate that you're truly paying attention and processing the information. For example, you could say, "That's an interesting point. Colleague's name. Could you elaborate on how that would impact specific project?"
Wow, that's taking it to a whole new level. You're not just acknowledging their point, you're digging deeper, inviting them to expand on their thinking, and showing genuine curiosity. It's like you've unlocked the secret code to meaningful meeting interactions.
It's all about making those connections and demonstrating that you value what others bring to the table. And remember, active listening goes both ways. While you're using those phrases to engage with others, pay attention to how they're responding. Are they leaning in, making eye contact, nodding along? Those nonverbal cues can tell you a lot about how your message is being received.
So it's like a meeting dance, a back and forth of verbal and nonverbal cues, where you're constantly reading the room and adjusting your approach.
Exactly. And when you master that dance, you create a more collaborative, engaging, and productive meeting environment. It's no longer just a boring meeting, it's a dynamic exchange of ideas.
I love that analogy. Okay, we've talked about preparation being concise and active listening. What other essential strategies should we add to our meeting mastery arsenal?
There's one more crucial element we can't overlook: staying professional at all times.
Okay, but that seems like a given, right? Don't show up in your pajamas, avoid interrupting people, and definitely no throwing staplers.
Those are definitely good starting points, but staying professional goes beyond just the obvious. It's about maintaining a respectful and positive tone throughout the meeting, even when things get challenging or you encounter those inevitable moments of disagreement.
So even if someone proposes something completely outlandish, like replacing all the coffee machines with kombucha dispensers, I need to keep my cool and respond with grace and diplomacy.
Exactly. Remember those power phrases for disagreement. They can be your secret weapon in these situations. Instead of saying, "That's the worst idea I've ever heard," you could say something like, "I see where you're coming from, but I have some concerns about the practicality of that approach." You're addressing the idea, not attacking the person.
It's like channeling your inner diplomat negotiating a peace treaty between coffee lovers and kombucha enthusiasts.
Precisely. Diplomacy is a valuable skill in any meeting. And remember, staying professional also includes avoiding interruptions, allowing everyone an opportunity to share their thoughts, and actively seeking out diverse perspectives. It creates a more inclusive and productive environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
All right, I'm taking notes. Preparation, conciseness, active listening, and staying professional. It's like we've practically written the Meeting Mastery Manifesto. But before we declare ourselves meeting masters, there's one more crucial aspect we haven't touched on yet.
You're right. In today's increasingly globalized world, we can't ignore the impact of cultural differences on meetings.
That's so important. Our listeners might be working with teams spread across continents with diverse backgrounds and communication styles. What insights does the podcast offer on navigating those complexities?
It highlights several key considerations, but one that really stood out to me was the concept of direct versus indirect communication styles.
Oh, that's a fascinating one. I've definitely encountered that before, working with colleagues from different cultures. What's the key takeaway here for our listeners?
The key takeaway is that what might be considered direct and assertive in one culture could be perceived as rude or aggressive in another. Similarly, what might seem like hesitant or indirect communication in one culture could actually be a sign of respect or a desire to avoid conflict in another.
So it's like there's a whole hidden layer of meaning beneath the words themselves, and if we're not attuned to those cultural nuances, we risk misinterpreting intentions and creating unnecessary tension.
Exactly. So how do we avoid those potential misunderstandings? It's like we need a universal meeting etiquette decoder.
Right, because what works in one cultural context might backfire in another.
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all decoder, unfortunately, but the key is awareness and adaptability.
So it's like being a cultural chameleon, adapting our communication style to fit the context.
Exactly. You don't have to become an expert in every culture overnight, but a little research goes a long way. Before meeting with colleagues from a different background, spend a few minutes familiarizing yourself with their cultural norms. It could make a world of difference in terms of building rapport and avoiding misunderstandings.
It's like that saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But in this case, it's when in a meeting, communicate as your colleagues do.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just words. Pay attention to their nonverbal cues as well. Are they very expressive with their hands? Do they make strong eye contact? Or is that considered rude in their culture? Being observant can provide valuable clues on how to adjust your own communication style.
It's like you're becoming a cultural detective gathering clues to crack the code of effective communication. And that makes the meeting more than just a task. It's a learning opportunity.
Absolutely. It's about embracing those differences, seeing them not as obstacles, but as opportunities to expand our own understanding of the world and how we community within it.
I love that perspective. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've unpacked power phrases, explored strategic tips, and even delved into the intricacies of global communication. Our listeners are practically equipped to lead a United Nations summit. But before we adjourn this meeting of the minds, is there anything else we should leave our listeners pondering?
I think it's important to remember that mastering meetings is an ongoing journey. It's not about memorizing a set of phrases or following a rigid script. It's about developing your communication skills, building your confidence, and adapting to different situations.
So it's like a muscle we need to keep flexing and strengthening.
Exactly. And just like any muscle, it takes practice and consistency to develop. Don't be afraid to experiment with different phrases and strategies. Pay attention to what works well and what could be improved. And most importantly, be yourself and let your genuine personality shine through.
I love that. Because at the end of the day, authenticity is what truly connects with people. You can have all the power phrases and strategies in the world, but if you're not being genuine, it won't resonate.
Absolutely. People can spot inauthenticity a mile away. So be yourself, be prepared, and be ready to rock that meeting.
Yes, go forth and conquer those conference rooms. But before you do, I have one final thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder. We've talked a lot about the words we use in meetings, but how much does our nonverbal communication impact the message we're trying to send? It's something to think about as you prepare for that next big meeting, because sometimes it's not what you say but how you say it that makes all the difference.